Every couple of years, usually around the time a new FromSoft game is released, a heated debate flares up over the difficulty settings in games. The discussion usually divides in two ideological camps. One camp rallies around these options as a means of accessibility. If you bought the game, you should be able to play the game however you'd like. Some people don't have the time to build skills that enable them to play difficult games. Others might have handicaps that prevent them from being able to have the same experience as the intended audience. The opposition argues that selectable difficulty settings dilute the experience the game has to offer and rob the achievement that comes from declaring victory over a final boss. By allowing the game to meet the player rather than forcing the player to meet the game, something meaningful is lost from the experience the game has to offer. Despite how heated and even politicized these discussions can get, I believe there is a facet of this that is rarely addressed. And despite how overlooked it is, I believe it is a core aspect of our medium. If you stick around to the end of the video, you will see exactly why the default difficulty setting is one of the worst aspects of the games that use it. There are a lot of games that sit on the far edges of either camp. Dark Souls stands as a shining beacon for those who extol the game's unwavering difficulty, forcing players to climb the peak or fall off in their attempt. Just as it's pointed to as an example of how some developers refuse to allow a broader audience to experience their games and make accommodations for those in need. Likewise, The Last of Us can either be a tour de force of accessibility options or an example of a game that expects nothing of its audience. I want to focus on games that will add a little more nuance to the conversation. Stellar Blade is an action Souls-like that recently released on the PC that I've been thoroughly enjoying. It's a game about pattern observation and perfecting yourself and your approach. Pokemon Unbound is a popular ROM hack that my friends and I have been playing a lot of. It's a fantastic game and I recommend you try it out. It's Pokemon through and through with better level and encounter design than any. Both Resident Evil 4 and Metal Gear Solid need no introduction. They're some of the greatest games ever made. Achieving flow in players is one of the core, fundamental aims in game design. Flow is the nirvana of gaming, the point where you forget that you're sitting in a chair, holding the controller, and begin to embody the player avatar on screen. The general consensus is that flow is achieved when the task at hand is just difficult enough to challenge the player. Too easy and the game simply becomes another task. Too difficult, and that challenge doesn't offer enough reward to remain engaging. Difficulty settings seek to address a core problem inherent in this quest for flow nirvana. How do you ensure your game is just the right level of difficulty for a player base that is coming to your game with a large range of experience? Only looking at flow, however, ignores another core issue with game design that arises from a mismatch in game difficulty and player skill: mechanical relevance. Each system inside of a game was carefully conceived, considered, and crafted. A perfectly well-balanced game will incentivize players to learn its systems, oftentimes through necessity. But when games aren't challenging enough, there isn't a mechanical benefit that players gain from going out of their way to master new mechanisms. One of the first games I ever played was Pokemon Red. There was only one way these games were played in my household. Get the most powerful Pokemon you could, teach them the most powerful moves you had access to, and blast your way through anything that moves. The deepest my strategy would ever go was keeping Sleep Powder on my Venusaur. Thunder Wave was just a move that you kept around until you could swap it for something that did damage. Revisiting these games as an adult and tuning into the competitive scene, I've learned that Pokemon's battle system is incredibly rich and nuanced, but you'd never know that from the games themselves, because you never needed to learn it. For me, this is where the gatekeeping argument for difficulty settings falls apart. Lowering the difficulty on games hasn't allowed me to experience the game. Rather, doing so has robbed me of the game as it was intended to be played. But with every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When games are too difficult, they will often force the players out of using some mechanisms that they might otherwise really connect with. In the Metal Gear Solid franchise, Kojima famously named the protagonist Snake because he wanted the player to be able to play the game in a manner that suited them. He wasn't a cobra, he wasn't a viper. The generic quality of the name reflected the open-ended nature of the approaches the players can take. This explanation simply doesn't hold water in the context of the games on harder difficulties. Using an extreme example, a European extreme example, simply being caught will land the player with a game over screen. And in order to get the highest rewards, one must avoid kills altogether. When I played these games in this context, seeing a host of gear and weapons that were fun, but simply not good enough to make the cut, was pretty disappointing. When a game uses a selectable difficulty system, the first decision a player makes is the single most impactful decision that player will make during the entire game. And the game is asking the player to make that decision at the point where they have the least information available. If you're brand new to video games, that decision should be easy. Likewise, if you're a professional streamer. However, in between those 2 points, there is a lot of nuance. I'm a father of 2 young children who rarely gets a chance to play anything beyond the occasional board game. I've been good at games in the past, but there's been a lot of opportunity for that edge to dull. Making a suboptimal decision at this point will have a greater impact than simply affecting your ego. It will affect the way that you engage with the game itself. If you choose to play the game on a mode that is softer than your abilities, you won't be pushed into growing as a player or exploring alternative ways to approach a problem. Likewise, if you select a difficulty that is harder than you should, you might stumble your way through, relying only on the most powerful tools available and taking advantage of cheese tactics when possible, when you might have really connected with some of the other features of the game. That doesn't mean there aren't ways of handling this well. Resident Evil 4 is perhaps one of the most well-known success stories. While the game does throw difficulty settings at the players right away, it naturally adjusts the difficulty of the game in the background within the parameters of these settings. It does so in a hidden, unobtrusive manner. The system it uses allows the game to funnel or incentivize the player into engaging the many different mechanisms the game offers, from weapon upgrades and variety to shot placement and melee attacks. Pokemon Unbound also gives the player a difficulty selector right off the rip. Unlike most games, however, it actually helps the player make an informed decision. It briefs you clearly and concisely on what kind of experience you are signing up for. It does help that it can safely assume that its players will have had some experience with Pokemon as a franchise. I don't think there's a significant audience of people who are playing a Pokemon ROM hack without having at least played one game before. The results are wonderful. The game is challenging, but not overwhelming. It naturally encourages you to diversify your team and, even on normal, forces you to use stat modification and status conditions to tackle its difficult gym leaders. Out of the games I've played recently, I think the game that I respect the most for its difficulty system is Stellar Blade. In Stellar Blade, you are simply given 2 options, Story Mode and Normal. This is the most heads-up selection option I've seen in a long time. Shift Up is communicating its message very clearly to its players. Do you want to play the game as intended, or are you just here for the vibes? It doesn't judge you either way. Story mode in games is nothing new, but by limiting the player to 2 options, they aren't asking you to make a judgment call on your own competency. If you might normally wonder whether you're good enough to play a harder game, or feel like medium might be a little too challenging, you aren't going to have to make an uninformed judgment call. You choose normal. Welcome to the party. You can make it easier for yourself by practicing your skills with the built-in simulator and by utilizing powerful consumables. But if you enjoyed Dark Souls by simply watching YouTube Let's Plays, this game has a place for you too. You are more than welcome to come aboard and scour old Earth for fun outfits. Shift Up found a way to have their cake and eat it too. I mainly made this video because I'm having so much fun with Stellar Blade, but I'm not far enough in the game to find any of its in-universe games to talk about. I'm excited to make a video about those once I find them. I also have a couple of requests for things to talk about. There's one from @SethBomb6122 that he would like to see a video about my insights on creating any type of game mechanic as it pertains to the overall gameplay system and feedback loop that the player experiences. There's another from @BirdBrotherGames that requests a video about auto battlers. I would love to get to that one too. I'm working on a script for each of these. Hopefully I'll have something for you soon. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, throw me a like and a subscribe. And comment below, too, if you have strong feelings about difficulty settings in video games. Until next time.